The phone vibrated in my hand, a small insistent tremor against my palm that felt far too large for the weight it carried. The screen displayed a picture of my son, Mark, smiling next to his wife, Sarah. It was an old picture from their wedding day, a time when the world seemed simple and full of promise. They looked so young, so happy, their eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine joy. That joy felt like a distant memory now, buried under layers of unspoken resentments and carefully constructed distance. It was a Tuesday. I remember the day vividly because I had just finished my usual morning routine, a cup of black coffee on the front porch, watching the sun burn away the last of the morning mist over the Ohio fields. The air was crisp, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil. For a man who had spent his life building a successful construction business, these quiet moments were my greatest luxury. I was retired now, the business handed off to my trusted foreman, and the days stretched out long and quiet. Too quiet sometimes. I answered the call, my voice a little rusty. "Mark?" There was a pause on the other end, a silence that felt heavy and deliberate. It wasn't Mark's voice that finally broke it. It was Sarah's. "Hello, George," she said, her tone as cool and polished as a newly minted coin. There was no warmth, no preamble, just a crisp formality that always put me on edge. "Sarah, is everything all right?" I asked, my heart sinking a little. I knew the answer before she even spoke. It never was. "Everything's fine, thank you, but I'm calling about something important." She paused again, a theatrical beat that she always used to emphasize her points. "Mark and I have been talking about your visits." A knot formed in my stomach. "My visits? I was just thinking about coming out next month for the kids' spring break. I haven't seen them since Christmas. How are they doing?" I tried to inject some cheerfulness into my voice, but it sounded forced, even to my own ears. "The kids are doing wonderfully," she said, her voice remaining flat. "But that's the thing, George. We don't think it's a good time for you to visit. Or any time, really. We've decided we need some space for our family." The words hit me like a physical blow. The world around me seemed to tilt. The fields, the sun, the gentle breeze, they all lost their focus, blurring into a chaotic mess. My hand trembled, this time not with the phone's vibration, but with a shock that radiated through my entire body. "Space? What are you talking about, Sarah? What have I done?" "It's not about what you've done," she said, her voice rising slightly with an edge of irritation. "It's about a lot of things. The way you talk to the kids, the things you say, we just don't think it's healthy for them right now. We need to focus on our own family unit without outside influences." "Outside influences?" I repeated, the phrase echoing hollowly in my mind. "I'm their grandfather, Sarah. I'm family." "Your family, yes," she conceded, but the word felt like a technicality, a legal term, rather than a heartfelt connection. "But our focus is on raising the kids with our values, not with yours. We want to do things our way." The conversation continued, but the words became a blur. Accusations veiled and direct about my old-fashioned ways, my unhelpful comments, my disruptive presence. Sarah was the one doing most of the talking, her voice a steady, relentless stream of carefully chosen grievances. Mark remained silent. I could hear him breathing in the background, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that was more painful than any word Sarah could have uttered. His silence was his agreement, his surrender. It was the confirmation that my son, my only child, was standing by and letting his wife sever the most important relationship in my life. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. The tears that had been welling up in my eyes finally spilled over, hot and stinging against my cheeks. "So, I can't see them? My grandchildren?" I choked out the words, the lump in my throat making it hard to breathe. "Not for the foreseeable future, George," Sarah said, her voice now softer but no less firm. "We think it's for the best. For everyone. I'm sorry." The apology felt like a final insult, a perfunctory gesture to an already decided outcome. I hung up. The silence that followed was immense, a vast, echoing void where the laughter of my grandchildren, Leo and Maya, used to fill my mind. I thought of their bright, curious eyes, their small hands in mine as we walked through the woods, their questions about the world that I so loved to answer. Now that was all gone, just like that. I sat on my porch for a long time, the phone still clutched in my hand, my knuckles white. The sun had risen higher and the morning mist was completely gone, replaced by a harsh, clear light that revealed every imperfection, every crack in the world around me. The college fund. The thought came to me like a sudden, sharp intake of breath. For years I had been contributing to 2 separate accounts for Leo and Maya, my secret gift to them, a future I was helping to build, just as I had built my own. I knew what I had to do. The decision wasn't born of malice, but of a cold, profound grief. If I wasn't allowed to be a part of their present, I would not be a part of their future either. I would not invest in a world where I was not welcome. My grandchildren's college fund. It was the only thing I had left to sell. The thought was chilling, but it was also a strange form of clarity. It was the only power I had left. The world had gone from quiet and peaceful to a place of betrayal and emptiness in the span of a single phone call. The first chapter of my retirement, of my life as a grandfather, had just ended, and the next one I knew would be very different. The funds were substantial. What I was going to do with the money I had no idea, but I knew one thing: it wouldn't be for them. The next morning, the house felt different. It was the same as always. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the scent of old wood, and the lingering smell of my morning coffee. But the air was heavy, thick with a loneliness I had never experienced before. It wasn't the comfortable solitude of retirement. It was the sharp, painful sting of isolation. I walked from room to room, and each one seemed to echo with a memory. The kitchen, where Maya and I had once baked cookies, her face dusted with flour, her giggles filling the space. The living room, where Leo and I would spread out my old blueprints, him asking 100 questions about how I built things. Those memories were now a form of torture. They were ghosts haunting my perfectly quiet, perfectly empty life. I went to my home office, a small room with a large wooden desk that had been with me since my early days in construction. I sat down, my hand shaking slightly as I reached for my laptop. I pulled up the financial accounts I had set up years ago for the kids. The numbers stared back at me, a testament to my years of hard work and my unwavering love for them, a love that, it seemed, had a price tag. The process of liquidating the accounts was surprisingly easy. A few clicks, a few confirmations. It felt clinical, almost mundane. There was no dramatic music, no lightning strike, just the quiet finality of a digital transfer. The money, a sum that had grown to over 6 figures, was now in my personal savings account. The number was impressive, a small fortune, but seeing it there next to my regular funds didn't bring any sense of relief or victory. It felt like I was holding a bag of ashes, the price of severing a bond. I had no plan, none at all. The act itself had been a raw instinctual reaction to a deep wound. It was a statement, a protest, a final and desperate assertion of my own worth when I felt I had been declared worthless. Now that the act was done, the cold reality of it set in. The money was a burden. What do you do with a fortune born of a broken heart? I spent the rest of the day in a haze. I went for a drive, my old truck rumbling along the country roads. I passed by familiar landmarks: the old oak tree on Miller's Hill, the red barn with the peeling paint, the small diner where I used to get my coffee. Everything looked the same, but I felt like a stranger in my own life. I felt disconnected, adrift. As evening fell, I found myself parked by the river, the same river where I had taught Mark how to skip stones when he was a boy. The water was dark and silent, reflecting the last sliver of daylight. I remembered how his small, determined hand would send a flat stone skimming across the surface, and how his face would light up with a mixture of pride and pure, unadulterated joy. That boy, my son, was now a man who stood by silently as his wife tore a piece of my heart out. I felt a sharp pang of anger, a hot, consuming rage that finally broke through the numbness. It wasn't just for Sarah. It was for Mark. How could he? How could he let this happen? My mind replayed the phone call, his silence, the quiet, almost imperceptible breath in the background. It was a conscious choice. He chose his wife over his father. He chose to let me be cut out of the lives of the only 2 people who made my quiet life feel full. The anger was a fire, and it was the first emotion I had felt since the call that didn't feel like a deep, bottomless sorrow. It was a fuel, and for the first time, a small, reckless idea began to form in my mind. The money. It was there, it was mine. What if I used it to build something, not a house or a bridge or a road? Something for me, something that was a direct contrast to the life I had built for my family. Something that was entirely my own. A final, bold statement. The thought was liberating and terrifying all at once. I started the truck and drove home, the headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The empty house was waiting. But for the first time since yesterday, The thought of it didn't feel so desolate. It felt like a blank canvas. The days that followed were a blur of restless energy. The anger I felt towards Mark and Sarah had transformed into a strange kind of purpose. I was a man who had spent his life building things, and now I was going to build a new life for myself, one that didn't revolve around the hope of a phone call or a visit that would never come. The first step was the money. It was just sitting there, a cold, hard number on a screen. I needed to turn it into something real, something tangible. My mind went back to my career. I had built homes, bridges, and commercial buildings, but my passion had always been more in the craftsmanship than the profit. I loved the feel of wood in my hands, the smell of sawdust, the satisfying sound of a hammer striking a nail. My own small workshop in the back of the house was my sanctuary. I started to research, not for my grandchildren's college funds anymore, but for something else entirely. I looked into land, not in Ohio, not anywhere near my old life. I needed a fresh start, a different landscape, a new canvas to work on. My search took me all across the country. I looked at properties in Montana with their vast empty skies. I considered the rugged coast of Maine, but something kept pulling me back to the Pacific Northwest. The images I saw online, towering pine forests, misty mornings, the deep blue of the ocean, spoke to a part of me I didn't know existed. It was a wild, untamed beauty that felt like a stark contrast to the perfectly manicured lawns of my old life. I found a property online, a small isolated cabin on a few acres of land in Washington state. The pictures were of a worn-down wooden cabin, almost swallowed by the surrounding forest. The ad described it as a fixer-upper with potential, a phrase that resonated with me on a deep level. It wasn't perfect. It was a mess. The roof looked like it was caving in, the windows were boarded up, and the whole place looked like it had been abandoned for years. But for some reason it called to me. It was a raw, honest piece of land, a reflection of the way I felt. Broken down, but with a chance to be rebuilt. I booked a flight to Seattle. I didn't tell anyone. Not my old friends, not my former employees. I just packed a single suitcase, made sure my house was locked up, and left. The trip was a blur of motion and thought. I sat on the plane, looking down at the patchwork of fields and cities, feeling a strange mix of fear and excitement. I was 65 years old, a widower, a retired man who was supposed to be settling into a quiet life of fishing and family dinners. Instead, I was flying across the country to a dilapidated cabin in the middle of nowhere. It was madness, and it was the sanest thing I had ever done. When I arrived, the difference was immediate. The air was colder, crisper, and carried the scent of pine and rain. The urban sprawl of Seattle gave way to the deep green embrace of the forest. The drive to the property was a long, winding road that seemed to go on forever, the trees standing tall on either side like silent, ancient guardians. And then I saw it. The cabin. It was even more run down in person. The porch sagged. The wood was grey and weathered, and moss clung to every surface. It looked less like a home and more like a tomb. But when I got out of the car, I felt something. A small spark of hope. A feeling I hadn't felt in weeks. I walked up to the front door, the old wood groaning under my feet. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was stale and dusty. A single beam of sunlight cut through a crack in the boarded-up window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The place was a disaster. Old furniture covered in sheets, a fireplace filled with a decade's worth of ash, and a musty smell that seemed to have permeated every surface. But as I looked around, I didn't see ruin. I saw a project. I saw a challenge. I pulled my phone out and called the real estate agent. "I'll take it," I said, my voice firm and resolute. "I'll take it just as it is." The agent was surprised, but I could hear the relief in his voice. He had probably been trying to get rid of this place for years. I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, just breathing in the scent of my new life. It was a new beginning, a lonely one maybe, but it was mine. I had turned their college fund into a new start for myself, and for the first time the anger I felt was replaced by something else, a quiet, determined strength. The purchase was finalized, and I was officially the owner of a forgotten piece of land in Washington. I spent the first few weeks living in a nearby motel, making daily trips to the cabin, armed with tools and a stubborn resolve. The work was grueling, and I was surprised by how much strength I still had in my 60s. Every day, I would put on my work gloves, open the creaking door and face the monumental task ahead of me, My first priority was the interior. The dust was thick, the smell of mildew overpowering. I started by tearing everything out. The old rotting floorboards, the crumbling drywall, the moldy furniture. It was a demolition of the past, a physical and symbolic act of clearing out the old to make way for the new. Each swing of the hammer, each rip of a board, felt like I was releasing a piece of the pain I had been carrying. I was not just fixing a house, I was trying to fix myself. The days were long, filled with the satisfying sounds of work. The screech of a circular saw, the rhythmic clang of a hammer, the satisfying thud of a heavy object hitting the ground. I was in my element. This wasn't a business, it was a personal crusade. There was no deadline, no budget to worry about. The money from the college fund, which had once felt like such a heavy burden, was now my fuel. It paid for new materials, better tools, and the occasional pizza when I was too tired to cook. I worked alone for the most part, a solitary figure in the woods. But one afternoon, a truck rumbled up the long dirt driveway. A woman with a kind, weathered face stepped out. She was my age, maybe a little younger, and had a smile that reached her eyes. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "I'm Eleanor. I live a few miles down the road. Saw your truck and figured I'd come say hello. It's been quiet around here for a while." I wiped the sawdust from my brow. "George." "Yes, I just bought the place. A little project." She laughed, a genuine, hearty sound. "A little project? Honey, that's an entire life's work. What on earth are you doing here all by yourself?" I hesitated. "How do you explain the wreckage of your family to a stranger?" "Just needed a change of scenery," I said, a vague answer that wasn't a lie, just a massive understatement. Eleanor didn't press. She just nodded, her eyes full of understanding. She had an aura of calm about her, the kind of person who had seen a lot of life and didn't judge a book by its tattered cover. We talked for a while. She told me about the small community, the nearest town, the best place to get lumber. She was a retired nurse, she said, and had been widowed for a few years. She had built her own little paradise out in the woods, a garden full of flowers and a home filled with art she made herself. Her presence was a breath of fresh air. She wasn't asking about my family. She wasn't judging my decision. She just saw a man working hard and offered a hand of friendship. She brought me a thermos of coffee the next day, and then a basket of sandwiches the day after. Our conversations were simple, focused on the work I was doing, the weather, the local wildlife. Her support was a small, steady flame in the darkness that had consumed me. One day she came over and found me staring at a particularly stubborn, load-bearing wall. "Stuck?" she asked gently. "It's a tricky one," I admitted. "If I take it down wrong, the whole roof could come down." "Well, 2 heads are better than 1, she said, and before I could protest, she was putting on her gloves. She wasn't a construction worker, but she was smart. She had a keen eye for detail and a mind that worked with quiet efficiency. We spent the rest of the day working together, bouncing ideas off each other. The wall came down perfectly. As we stood there, surrounded by the remnants of the wall, she said, "You know, this is a beautiful spot, George. You're going to make something special here." Her words weren't a platitude, they felt true, and for the first time since that phone call, a small, genuine smile touched my lips. I wasn't just building a cabin, I was building a friendship, and a new foundation for my life, piece by piece, hammer strike by hammer strike. The months that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. I would wake early, make my coffee, and walk the perimeter of the property, planning the day's work. The mornings were often misty and cool, and I loved the way the sunlight would filter through the tall trees, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. The cabin was slowly transforming. The old rotting wood was replaced with fresh, aromatic cedar. The boarded-up windows were replaced with new ones that let in a flood of natural light. Eleanor became a constant presence in my life. She wasn't there every day, but she would show up with a plate of her homemade lasagna, or a fresh pot of stew, or just to sit on the porch, which I had rebuilt from scratch, and talk. Our conversations drifted from the mundane to the deeply personal. She told me about her late husband, a kind man who had been a logger and had loved the woods as much as I did. She spoke of her children, grown and living in other states, with a kind of gentle sadness that I understood completely. We were two people who had found solace in solitude, and now had found an unexpected comfort in each other's company. I found myself opening up to her, something I hadn't done with anyone in years. I told her the whole story, the phone call, Sarah's words, Mark's silence, the college fund, the raw, painful truth. I watched her face as I spoke. There was no pity, no judgment, just a quiet, empathetic understanding. When I was finished, she didn't say anything for a long time. She just took a sip of her coffee and stared out at the trees. "That's a terrible kind of hurt," she finally said, her voice soft. "To be told you're not good enough, not even for your own blood." "It's not just the money," I said, a little defensively. "It was the principle, the finality of it. They wanted me out of their lives and they got it." "The money was just the way you put a final period on the sentence, George," she said, her voice still gentle. "It was the only power you had left in a situation where you had none. And you know what? It was your money. You worked for it. You have every right to do what you want with it." Her words were a balm. It was the first time I felt like my decision, born of such pain, was understood. She didn't call it petty or cruel. She called it a choice born of desperation. It was a subtle but profound shift in perspective. As the weeks turned into months, the cabin began to feel like a home. I had replaced the old crumbling fireplace with a new, beautiful stone one. I built custom bookshelves, a kitchen island, and a new bed frame. Every piece of wood I cut, every nail I hammered, was an act of healing. The college fund money was being put to a different kind of education, one in self-reliance, in finding purpose after loss, and in the surprising strength of the human spirit. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. It was a bank statement. I had completely forgotten about it. The numbers were still there, the vast sum of money I had liquidated. I stared at the balance, and for the first time, I didn't see the ghost of my grandchildren's future. I saw the material cost of my new life, the lumber, the tools, the new appliances. It was all there. I realized that the money had become a physical representation of my healing. It was the foundation of this new beginning. I thought about Mark and Sarah. I wondered if they had noticed the accounts were gone. I wondered if they had even checked. Probably not. They were too wrapped up in their own lives, their own family unit. The thought no longer brought a sharp sting of pain, but a quiet, detached sadness. I was no longer angry. The anger had been replaced by a kind of acceptance, a difficult, painful, but ultimately peaceful acceptance. I put the bank statement in a drawer and went back outside. Eleanor was waiting, holding a tray with 2 glasses of lemonade. We sat on the new porch, watching the sun set over the trees. The air was cool and smelled of pine. The silence between us was comfortable, a testament to the trust we had built. I had lost a family, but I had found a home. And maybe, just maybe, I had found something even more valuable. A quiet place to be me, to heal, and to build something real. The construction of the cabin was nearing completion. The roof was on, the windows were in, and the interior was taking shape. I was finally starting to feel like the place was truly mine. The loneliness was still there, a faint background hum, but it no longer consumed me. It was a part of me now, a scar from a deep wound that had finally started to heal. One crisp autumn morning, as I was sanding a new kitchen cabinet, I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart jumped into my throat. It wasn't Eleanor's familiar truck. This was a sedan, a clean, expensive-looking one, a car that didn't belong in the woods. A car that looked a lot like the one my son Mark drove. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked outside. The driver's side door opened, and Mark stepped out. He looked tired, older than his picture, with lines etched around his eyes that weren't there before. He was alone. "Dad?" he said, his voice hesitant, almost a question. "Mark," I replied, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "What are you doing here?" He looked around, his eyes taking in the newly built porch, the fresh wood, the tools scattered on the ground. His face was a mask of disbelief. I saw the bank statements, the college funds. They're gone. Sarah got an alert. She said it was a glitch at first, but then we checked and they're gone. All of it. We called the bank and they said they were liquidated and transferred to your account." "That's right," I said, my voice flat. "I liquidated them." His eyes widened. "Why?" "Dad, that was for the kids' education. Leo and Maya, how could you?" The anger in his voice was a raw, unfiltered emotion that I had not heard from him in years. "How could I?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "How could I, Mark? How could you? You stood by while your wife told me I couldn't see my grandchildren. You let her cut me out of their lives, and you said nothing. You were silent. So I made a choice too. If I'm not a part of their lives, I'm not a part of their future. It's that simple. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. It's not that simple. It was a momentary thing. Sarah was upset. She was stressed, and you can be difficult, Dad. You know that. We were going to talk about it. We were going to find a way to make it work. But now you've just destroyed their future. Do you know how much that was? I know exactly how much it was, I said, gesturing to the half-finished cabin. It's right here. It built this. Mark's eyes followed my hand, and for the first time he really saw the cabin, the raw, beautiful wood, the new windows, the care and attention to detail. It was a physical representation of the life I had built with his money. His anger seemed to drain away, replaced by a look of profound sadness and confusion. You used it on this? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. You used my kids' money to build a cabin in the woods? No, I said, my voice suddenly calm, all the anger gone. I used my money. The money I earned, the money I gave to them because I loved them. And when that love was rejected, I used the money to save myself. I didn't just build a cabin, Mark. I built a new life. Because the old one, the one with you and your family, was gone. He stood there, silent, his shoulders slumped. I could see the conflict in his face. He was a man caught between two worlds, his wife's demands and his father's pain. His silence had caused the chasm between us. And now, seeing the result of that silence, he seemed to finally understand the gravity of what had happened. I need to go, he said, turning back to his car. I can't look at this right now. Sarah is going to be furious. She'll be fine, I said, a little more gently than I intended. You have your family, Mark. That's what you wanted. You have a new life, and now I have mine. It's just different. He got back in his car without another word. I watched him back down the driveway, the engine noise fading into the quiet of the woods. I was left standing alone, a lone figure in the silence of the forest. The conversation had been painful, but it was necessary. It was the final chapter of my old life. And now there was nothing left to do but go back inside and finish building my new one. The visit from Mark left me rattled. The anger was gone, but a deep, melancholic sadness had taken its place. It was one thing to make the decision to cut ties and move on, but it was another thing entirely to face the person you've cut ties with and see the impact of that decision. Mark's face, a mix of shock and betrayal, was seared into my mind. I had expected anger, but not that kind of profound, quiet disappointment. It was a mirror of my own. I spent the next 2 days working in silence, the sounds of my tools muffled by my thoughts. I was replaying the conversation in my head, dissecting every word, every look on his face. Did I go too far? Was it cruel to show him what I had built with the money? The guilt was a heavy weight on my shoulders, a familiar companion from my childhood. My own father had been a hard, unyielding man, and I had always tried to be different, kinder, more understanding. But in this situation, I had become just as unyielding as he had been. On the third day, Eleanor showed up with a casserole, her usual warm smile on her face. She took one look at me and her smile faltered. "He was here, wasn't he?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, not needing to explain. "My son, Mark. And? He was angry. About the money. He saw what I'm doing with it. He said I destroyed their future." Eleanor set the casserole down on the new kitchen counter, which I had just installed the week before. She took a deep breath. "George, sit down. Let's talk." We sat at the small table I had built from reclaimed barnwood. The scent of pine and fresh-cut wood filled the air. "He came here with a lot of expectations, didn't he?" she said. "He expected to see you broken. He expected to see you begging for their forgiveness. He expected you to be the same man he left behind in Ohio, a man who would just take the rejection and say nothing." "I don't know what he expected," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'm worried I went too far. It was a cruel thing to do, wasn't it?" "Cruel? No," she said, shaking her head. "You stood up for yourself. You drew a line in the sand. You said, if you don't value me, then I won't value what you value." It was a message. A painful one, yes, but a necessary one. You have to understand, George, that their pain is a direct result of their choices. You didn't do this to them. They did this to themselves. They chose to hurt you, and you chose to heal. Her words were a much-needed dose of reality. She wasn't sugarcoating it. She was just telling me the truth. But my grandchildren, I trailed off, the lump in my throat returning. They're innocent in all this. And they are, she agreed. But do you really think that fund was the only way they would get a good education? Mark and Sarah are smart, successful people. They could have saved up that money themselves. They just didn't have to because they had you. That fund wasn't just for the kids, George. It was a convenience for them. And now that it's gone, they have to face the reality of their own responsibilities. They have to face the fact that they cut off the person who was their safety net. And that's not your fault. That's a consequence of their actions. I sat in silence, absorbing her words. She was right. The college fund was a gesture of love, but it was also a form of control, a way for me to remain connected to them even when I couldn't be there physically. And when Sarah had taken that connection away, I had just cut the wire. You're building something beautiful here, George, Eleanor said, a warm smile returning to her face. You're building a life for yourself. You're finding a new purpose. Don't let their anger or their guilt take that away from you. You did what you had to do to survive. We ate the casserole together, talking about her day, about the work on the cabin, about anything and everything but the visit from my son. The easy, comfortable rhythm of our friendship was a lifeline. I was still sad, but the guilt had started to fade, replaced by a quiet, fierce resolve. I had a choice. I could let my family's betrayal define me, or I could use it as a catalyst to build something new. With Eleanor's help, I was choosing the latter. I was building a new life, and it was a life I was beginning to love. As the cabin neared completion, my world began to expand beyond the perimeter of my property and Eleanor's visits. She introduced me to some of the other locals, a small, tight-knit community of people who lived and worked in the woods. They were a diverse group, a retired fisherman, a young couple who ran a small organic farm, a woman who owned a pottery studio. They were all different, but they shared a common bond, a love for this quiet, rugged part of the country and a deep respect for a man who knew how to build things with his own two hands. I started helping them with small projects. I fixed the porch railing on the fisherman's house. I built a new gate for the organic farm. I helped the potter reinforce her studio roof. In return, they would bring me fresh fish, ripe vegetables, and a beautiful handcrafted coffee mug. These small acts of kindness, these exchanges of labor and goods, felt more real and honest than any of the cold digital transactions I had become used to. My reputation in the community grew. They saw me not as a heartbroken old man, but as George, the builder, the man with the steady hands and the quiet way of getting things done. It was a new identity, one I had forged with my own sweat and hard work. It was a kind of redemption, a way to prove my worth to myself, not to my family. One evening, Eleanor and I were sitting on my new porch, watching the sun set. I had just finished the last major piece of construction, a beautiful wraparound deck. It was a perfect, peaceful moment. The air was cool, and the scent of the trees was intoxicating. You know, I said, breaking the silence, when I first got here I felt so alone. I thought I had lost everything. My family, my purpose, everything. You did, Eleanor said, her voice gentle. But you found something else. Something better, maybe. A family of choice, not of blood. A purpose that is entirely your own. It's strange, I said, a small smile on my face. The money. It was a curse at first. I couldn't stand the sight of it. It was a reminder of what I had lost. But now it's this. This house. These friendships. This life. It's a reminder of what I've gained. Eleanor reached over and put a hand on my arm. You're a good man, George. You always were. And I'm glad you're here. Her words were a simple truth, and they brought a tear to my eye. I had not felt this kind of peace, this kind of acceptance, in years. I had been so focused on my son and his family, on trying to fit into a mold that they had created for me, that I had lost sight of who I was. And now in the quiet solitude of the woods I was finally finding myself again. I thought about Mark again. I wondered if he had gone back to Ohio and told Sarah what he had seen. I wondered what their conversations were like now. I didn't hate them anymore. The anger was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, almost detached compassion. They were trapped in their own little world, a world of expectations and control. I, on the other hand, was free. I had no one to please, no one to impress. I was just George, the builder, living in the home he had built with his own two hands. And that, I realized, was a priceless gift. A gift that the college fund could never have bought. The first year in my new home passed in a quiet, satisfying blur of work and newfound friendship. My cabin was finally complete, a testament to my skill and resilience. It was a beautiful home, filled with the scent of wood and a sense of deep, abiding peace. I was no longer the lonely, heartbroken old man who had arrived a year ago. I was George, the retired builder, the friend to the locals, the man who had found a new life in the woods. One evening, as I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the quiet hum of the crickets, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and my breath caught in my throat. It was Mark. I hadn't heard from him since his visit, since that raw, painful confrontation in my driveway. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend he didn't exist anymore, but a stronger, more curious part of me wanted to know, what could he possibly have to say? I answered the call, my voice a little rusty. "Mark? Dad, it's me," he said, his voice sounding tired and thin. Are you still out there?" "I am," I replied, my voice calm. "I live here now. My house is finished." There was a long pause on the other end, a silence that was different from the last one. This one felt less like a surrender and more like a quiet defeat. "Sarah, she's been a little difficult since I got back," he finally said. "She's furious about the money. She said you ruined everything." "Did I, Mark?" I asked, my voice still calm. "Did I ruin everything, or did I just reveal what was already broken?" He was silent again. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the uncomfortable truth settling in. I don't know," he finally admitted. "Maybe you're right. She's been so angry, Dad. She blames you for everything. She says the kids won't be able to go to college now, that their lives are ruined." "That's not true, and you know it," I said, a touch of sharpness in my voice. "You're a successful man, Mark. You and Sarah can afford to pay for their college. You just don't have to anymore, because you don't have me as a fallback." "I know," he said, the words barely a whisper. "But she doesn't. She's so used to everything being a certain way. Our life, our plans. She had it all mapped out. And you just threw a grenade into the middle of it." "She was the one who threw the first grenade, Mark," I said, my voice firm. "She cut me out of my grandchildren's lives. I just made the consequences real." "I know, Dad. I know," he said, and I could hear a raw, unfiltered pain in his voice. "I should have stood up to her. I should have told her she was wrong, but it's just so much easier to go along with it." "Sometimes the easiest path is the one that leads to the greatest sorrow," I said, a piece of wisdom from my old construction days. "Yeah," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm starting to see that." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of his unsaid words. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "What is it, son? Are you happy?" The question was so simple, so direct, that it caught me off guard. I looked out at the setting sun, at the trees that were now my friends, at the beautiful home I had built with my own 2 hands. I thought of Eleanor, of the new friends I had made. I thought of the peace and purpose I had found. "Yes, Mark," I said, the words coming from a place of deep, profound honesty. "I am. I'm happier than I've been in years." The silence on the other end of the line was the most telling thing of all. He had come looking for a fight, or for an apology, or for some kind of sign that I was still the same man he had left behind, but he had found a man who had changed, a man who had found peace after loss. He had come looking for a broken man, and he had found a whole one. I have to go, Dad," he finally said, his voice choked with emotion. I'll call you again." "You do that, son," I said, and I hung up the phone. The crickets chirped, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the stars began to emerge. The conversation had been difficult, but it had also been a form of closure. I wasn't just building a house, I was building a new legacy, one of resilience, of self-worth and of peace. And for the first time I felt like the future, whatever it held, was entirely my own. The phone call from Mark had a lingering effect. It was a reminder of the chasm between my old life and my new one, but it also served as a kind of final seal on the past. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a deep gratitude for the peace I had found. I spent the next few weeks working on my garden, a new project I had started with Eleanor's help. I was learning about the local flora, about the kind of vegetables that thrived in this climate. It was a slower, more deliberate kind of work, a contrast to the raw power of building. One afternoon, a small car pulled up the driveway. It wasn't Mark's or Eleanor's. A young woman with a long ponytail and kind eyes stepped out. She looked a lot like Eleanor, but younger, with a restlessness in her movements. "Hi," she said, a little hesitantly. "You must be George. I'm Amelia, Eleanor's daughter." "It's nice to meet you," I said, wiping my hands on my gardening gloves. "Eleanor talks about you all the time." "She talks about you too," she said, a small, knowing smile on her face. "She told me about the cabin. I had to see it for myself." We walked around the property. Amelia was a city girl, a graphic designer from Portland, and she was clearly impressed by the work I had done. She ran her hand over the smooth wood of the deck, peered into the large windows, and marveled at the small details I had crafted with my own hands. "This is amazing," she said, her voice full of genuine admiration. "Mom told me you were a builder, but I had no idea you were this good. It's like something out of a magazine." I shrugged, a little embarrassed. "It was a lot of hard work." "I can tell," she said, "but it's more than that. It feels peaceful. It has a soul." We went inside, and I showed her the new kitchen, the fireplace, the custom bookshelves. She was quiet for a while, just taking it all in. Then she turned to me, her expression serious. "My mum's been so much happier since you came here, George," she said. "She's been so lonely since my dad passed away. She wouldn't admit it, but she was. And then you showed up, a man who knows how to fix things, not just houses, but people too. You gave her a project, a reason to get up in the morning." I was taken aback. I didn't do anything." "You did," she insisted, her eyes soft. "You were just here. You were a new chapter in her life, a new beginning. She sees herself in you, you know, a person who had to lose everything to find a new kind of purpose." Her words were a stark reminder of the unspoken bond that Eleanor and I shared. We had both been alone. Both had suffered a kind of loss that was difficult to describe. We had both been broken, and we had both found a way to heal. She had helped me, and I in turn had helped her. It was a beautiful, unexpected cycle of support and understanding. Amelia stayed for a few more days, and we talked a lot about her mom, about her own life, about the future. I felt a kind of quiet joy in her presence. She wasn't my granddaughter, but she was the daughter of my friend, and that felt like a kind of family too, a family that I had chosen, and that had chosen me. As she was leaving, she gave me a tight hug. "Thank you, George," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for being here, for being a friend to my mum, for being you." I watched her drive away, and the tears that had been welling up in my eyes finally spilled over. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming gratitude. I had lost so much, but I had gained even more. My cabin was not just a house, it was a home. My life was not just a series of solitary days, it was a network of connection and love. And all of it, I realized, was a gift that I had given to myself, a gift that was born from the wreckage of a broken heart. Life continued its quiet, peaceful rhythm. The seasons changed. The trees turned from a vibrant green to a fiery red and gold, and then to a stark, beautiful gray. My new garden was thriving, a testament to my patience and newfound knowledge. I spent my days reading, working on small woodworking projects, and enjoying the company of Eleanor and the other locals. My old life in Ohio felt like a distant memory, a story I had read in a book. Then, one rainy afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but the return address was Mark's. My heart began to pound in my chest. I opened it with shaking hands. The letter was not from Mark, but from my granddaughter, Maya. "Dear Grandpa, I don't know if you'll get this. Mum and Dad have been telling us a lot of different things, that you're on a long trip, that you're taking a break. But I overheard them talking the other day, and I heard them say you sold the college fund. I'm not mad. I'm just confused. I miss you. I miss our talks about the woods and the trees. I miss the stories you used to tell us. I miss you, and I want to know why you went away. Please write back, or call, or something. I just want to know that you're okay. Love, Maya." I read the letter again, and a cold wave of emotion washed over me. It was raw, honest, and filled with a kind of innocent pain that broke my heart. It was a voice from the past, a voice that I had believed was lost to me forever. It was a crack in the wall I had built around my heart, and it was a painful, beautiful thing. I sat with the letter for a long time, the rain tapping a steady rhythm on the roof. My first instinct was to write back, to explain everything, to tell her the truth, but then a deeper, more cautious part of me took over. What would I say? Your parents told me I couldn't see you, so I sold your college fund and built a new life for myself. The words felt harsh and cruel, a burden I didn't want to place on a child's shoulders. I realized I couldn't tell her the whole truth. Not now. Maybe not ever. The story of my conflict with her parents was an adult problem, a heavy burden that was not meant for her small, innocent shoulders. I couldn't involve her in this mess. She deserved to be a child, to be protected from the complicated, messy emotions of the adults in her life. I decided to write back, but not with the full truth. I would write a letter filled with love, but also with a kind of gentle deflection. I would tell her about the beautiful, wild place I now lived in. I would tell her about the trees and the river. I would tell her about the cabin I had built with my own hands. I would tell her a story that was real, but a story that was also a kind of shield. I pulled out a pen and a sheet of paper and began to write. I wrote about the way the sun sets over the mountains, about the quiet beauty of the snow, about the animals that roamed the woods. I didn't mention her parents. I didn't mention the college fund. I just wrote about my new life, a life that I had built with my own hands. I ended the letter with a simple, heartfelt promise. I'm okay, Maya, and I miss you too, always. I sealed the letter and took it to the post office the next day. As I walked back to my truck, a strange mix of emotions swirled inside me. There was the sharp, painful sting of guilt for not telling her the whole truth, but there was also a quiet, profound love. I had made a choice, and that choice had brought me to this peaceful place, but it had also created a distance between me and the people I loved, a distance that, I realized, would never be fully closed. But in that moment, in the silence of the woods, I had found a way to bridge it, a way to connect with my granddaughter, a way to tell her that I was okay, without having to tell her why. The letter from Maya was a turning point. It had reawakened the paternal part of me, the part that had always wanted to be a teacher and a guide to my grandchildren. I couldn't be there for them in person, but I could still be a presence in their lives. I decided to start a new project, a project that was a direct result of Maya's letter. I would start a journal, a kind of chronicle of my new life. It wouldn't be just a simple diary. It would be a record of what I was learning, the skills I was relearning, and the wisdom I was gaining. I started a new journal, a beautiful leather-bound one with blank pages that I bought in the local town. I began to fill the pages with stories. I wrote about the process of building the cabin, the challenges I faced, and the satisfaction of seeing it all come together. I wrote about the local plants and animals, the different kinds of trees, the sounds of the woods. I wrote about my friendship with Eleanor, about the way her gentle support had helped me heal. And I wrote about my memories of my own father, about the lessons he had taught me, and the lessons I had learned on my own. I wrote for hours every day, the words flowing out of me like a river. It was a form of therapy, a way to process the grief and the anger that I had once felt. But it was also something more. It was a legacy. I was creating a document that one day I hoped to give to Leo and Maya, not as a way to prove my point, but as a way to show them who their grandfather was and who he had become. It was a way to share my life with them, even when they weren't physically here. Eleanor found me one afternoon, hunched over my journal at my kitchen table, a small smile on my face. She took one look at the open book and the pen in my hand. "What are you working on?" she asked gently. "A journal," I replied. "A record of my life out here, for my grandchildren." Her eyes softened. "That's a beautiful thing, George. I can't be a part of their lives right now," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I can be a presence. I can give them this, a piece of me, a story of a man who got lost and then found his way home. Maybe one day it will help them find their way too." Eleanor didn't say anything. She just reached over and placed a hand on my shoulder. The quiet, unspoken support was more powerful than any words. It was a testament to the trust and understanding we had built. My relationship with my grandchildren was still a painful one, a distant, fragile thing. But now, I had a way to nurture it, a way to keep it alive. I was no longer a man with a broken heart, but a man with a purpose, a new purpose, to turn my pain into a story, to turn the college fund into a new kind of education, an education in resilience, in self-worth, and in the surprising, beautiful strength of the human heart. The days passed, and the journal grew thicker. The pages were filled with my life, with my struggles, with my small victories. It was a living, breathing document, a testament to the fact that a man in his 60s could still learn, still grow, and still find a new kind of love. It was a new legacy, a new kind of foundation, and for the first time, I felt a deep, abiding peace. A peace that was born not from the absence of pain, but from the acceptance of it, and from the beautiful, courageous choice to turn that pain into something beautiful. The first snow of the year fell one morning, a soft, silent blanket that transformed the woods into a winter wonderland. I sat on my porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the flakes fall, a cup of coffee steaming in my hands. The world was quiet, a peaceful silence that felt a world away from the chaotic life I had left behind. I had received a second letter from Maya, a short, simple note that was a response to my own. "Dear Grandpa, thank you for the letter. It was so good to hear from you. The pictures of the trees are beautiful. I wish I could see them in person. I told Leo about them, and he said he misses you too. I hope we can see you again soon. Love, Maya." The letter was a small, fragile thread of connection, but it was enough. It was a confirmation that my efforts were not in vain, that they still loved me, even from a distance. I knew the letters were likely being read by Mark and Sarah. I knew my words were a kind of Trojan horse, a way to get past their defenses and into the hearts of my grandchildren. I didn't care. As long as I could maintain the connection, as long as I could be a presence in their lives, it was worth it. My relationship with Eleanor had deepened as well. We were no longer just friends. We were companions. We cooked together. We gardened together. We sat on my porch and watched the world go by. We were two old souls who had found each other at the end of a long, difficult road. She was a constant source of strength and wisdom, and I was grateful for her every day. One evening, as we sat by the fire in my new fireplace, a comfortable silence settled between us. The fire crackled and hissed, and the scent of the burning wood filled the air. "You've changed, George," Eleanor said softly, breaking the silence. "You're not the same man who showed up here a year ago." "I know," I said, a small smile on my face. "I'm not. I've been rebuilt, I guess." "Rebuilt," she repeated, a thoughtful expression on her face. "That's a good word for it. You took something broken and you made it new. But you also learned that not everything needs to be fixed. That some things are just gone, and that's okay." "I've made my peace with it," I said, the words feeling true and honest. "I have my life here, I have you, I have the quiet, and I have my legacy, the one I'm building now, not the one I thought I would have." She reached over and took my hand, her grip warm and firm. "That's a powerful thing, George. To be able to let go, to be able to accept what is. Most people never get there." I thought of Mark and Sarah. I wondered if they would ever get there. If they would ever be able to let go of their anger and their expectations and just accept what was. I knew it was a long road, but I also knew, with a quiet certainty, that I had done what I had to do. I had drawn a line in the sand. I had stood up for myself. I had turned my pain into purpose. And in the process I had found a kind of peace that I never thought was possible. The college fund was gone, but what I had built with it was far more valuable. It was a new life, and it was all mine. The winter passed, and spring returned to the woods with a burst of new life. The snow melted, the trees began to bud, and the world was filled with the promise of a new beginning. I was working in my garden, planting new seedlings, when I heard the familiar sound of a car coming up the driveway. My heart gave a little jolt. It was Mark's sedan again. I straightened up, wiping the dirt from my hands. He got out of the car, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and drawn. He looked exhausted, older than when I had last seen him. He was alone again. "Dad," he said, his voice flat. "Mark," I replied, my voice calm. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I haven't. Sarah, she's leaving me." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, stunned, the trowel still in my hand. "What? Why?" "She found out," he said, his voice a whisper. "About the letters. Maya was hiding them under her bed. Sarah found one of your letters, and she went ballistic. She said I was a traitor. She said I was a bad father. She said she couldn't be with someone who would let his own father ruin their children's future. He was telling me a story I already knew, a story I had lived. The story of a woman who was so obsessed with control that she would rather tear her own family apart than admit she was wrong. "And the college fund?" I asked, my voice soft. "She hasn't been able to save up the money herself," he admitted, his face red with shame. "She's been so angry, so focused on blaming you, that she hasn't done anything about it. And now she says it's too late, that their future is gone because of you." "Mark," I said, my voice firm, "look at me, look around you." I gestured to the cabin, the garden, the peaceful woods. "This is not what ruined looks like. This is what healing looks like. You and Sarah were so focused on having things your way that you couldn't see the love and the help that was right in front of you. You pushed me away. And now you're paying the price." He looked around, his eyes filled with a new kind of pain. Not just anger, but a deep, profound regret. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry I didn't stand up for you. I'm so sorry I let her do this." He broke down then, the dam of his emotions finally breaking. He just stood there, a grown man in his 40s, weeping in my front yard. I walked over to him and put my arms around him. He was my son, my blood, and even though we had been separated by years of distance and anger, the bond was still there. It was a painful bond, but it was still a bond. "It's going to be okay, son," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "It's going to be okay." We stood there for a long time, just holding on to each other, two broken men trying to find a way to heal. The college fund was gone, the family was broken, but something else was being built. A new relationship, one born not of a shared past, but of a shared pain, and a shared hope for a better future. The past was over. Now we had to find a way to build a new future, together. Mark stayed with me for a few weeks. We didn't talk much at first. He spent his days in a kind of dazed silence, wandering around the property, helping me with the garden, staring out at the woods. He was a man who had lost his way, and I was a man who had found his, and the roles were now reversed. I was the one with the strength, the one with the quiet, determined purpose, and he was the one who was lost. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch, watching the stars come out, he finally spoke. "I should have listened to you, Dad. I should have stood up to her. I should have told her that you were more important than her pride." "It's not about being more important, Mark," I said, my voice gentle. "It's about having a voice. It's about knowing your own worth. You were so worried about keeping her happy that you lost yourself, and now you have a chance to find out who you are again." "I don't know who I am," he said, his voice raw. "I'm not a husband anymore. I don't know what I am." "You're a father," I said, my voice firm. "That's what you are. And now you have a chance to be the father you were always meant to be. The one who stands up for his kids, the one who puts them first. Not his wife, not his career, not anything else." He was quiet for a long moment, the truth of my words settling in. "What about the college fund, Dad?" he finally asked, his voice filled with a painful honesty. "What about their future? What are we going to do?" I looked at him, at the face of the son I had almost lost, and I felt a profound sense of love, a love that was a fierce, protective thing. "We're going to build it," I said, a small, knowing smile on my face. "Together." The next morning I drove him into town. We went to the local bank, and I pulled up my account. The money from the college fund was still there, mostly untouched. I had used some of it, yes, but the bulk of it was still there. "This is your project now, Mark," I said, gesturing to the screen. "Your new project. You're going to take this money, and you're going to build a new fund, a new foundation, one that is built on your own terms, not on Sarah's, not on mine, on yours." He looked at the number on the screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. You saved it?" he asked, his voice filled with a childlike wonder. You didn't spend it all?" "I used it to build this new life," I said, a wave of emotion washing over me. "I used it to save myself. And now it's your turn. You're going to use it to save your family, your kids. You're going to rebuild what was broken. You're going to be a man, Mark. A man with a voice. A man with a purpose. A man who knows his own worth." He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for everything." We spent the rest of the week working together, not on my cabin, but on his new future. We opened 2 new accounts, one for Leo and one for Maya. He set up an automatic transfer from his own account, a small daily act of a man who was taking responsibility for his own life. The money was a symbol of what was lost, but it was also a symbol of what was found. A new beginning, a new purpose, a new kind of love. As he was getting ready to leave, he turned to me, his face filled with a quiet strength I had not seen in years. "I'll be back, Dad," he said, his voice firm. "I'll be back, and I'll bring the kids." I just nodded, my heart full. I had lost my grandchildren's college fund, but I had gained something far more valuable. I had gained my son. And now, I had a new legacy to build. A legacy not just of wood and stone, but of love, of forgiveness, and of the quiet, beautiful power of a new beginning. My life, my family was not over. It was just beginning.